Up next on Radio Dayz the Podcast.
Normally, when you get a call back, it's just you go to the casting director and you do the scene, they work on it a little bit, and then you wait to see if you booked it. Well, with this callback, they were like, you're going to right off Cahuenga Boulevard in L.A. The callback is at Quentin Tarantino's office. You're going to read with Quentin Tarantino.
Greetings and salutations, and welcome to Radio Dayz, a podcast radio program that delves into the world of terrestrial radio. It's DJs and on-air personality, and you, all fans of radio as a medium. Here's your host, Ron.
Hello and welcome to Radio Dayz the Podcast. You can hear this podcast on BuzzSprout, as well as all major podcast platforms like Spotify, Google Podcasts, among others. You can also watch this podcast via YouTube and at ronrobinsonstudios.com. In this episode, I got to tell you, I know I say this all the time, but I'm super pumped about this episode, which is brought to you by Team 71 Mortgage Group and Radio Dayz the Movie. We're going to be taking a dive into the radio, movie, and television career of a friend of mine and former coworker, Mr. Larry Herron. You may not know his name, but trust me, you've likely seen him on some of your favorite TV shows and movies. And although he now resides in Southern California, he got his start on the John Jay Morning Show. I think he got a start. He might have had a job before that. We'll ask him about that. He got a start on the morning show at WIRX in Benton Harbor, Michigan. And now, couldn't be more happy for this guy. He's a working actor in Hollywood. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Larry Herron. Larry, how are you, sir?
Can only go down from here. End it now. End it now. Ron, it's good to be with you, man. Thanks for having me. So excited. Yeah, the morning after with John Jay is the first big introduction to the world of show business in Benton Harbor, Michigan.
Yeah, people forget that radio is kind of like the bedrock of the entertainment genre. You got radio, television, obviously movies and theater, but yeah, you know, Larry the Cable Guy started in radio and all. I mean, It's just. But we're going to talk a little bit about your the beginning. But first, I got to ask you. You know, we're getting a little warmer here. This is the second year I got a boat. What's the weather like in Southern California?
Oh, it's so nice today. I think the high is like 78. We're done with the rain. You probably heard we had all these rains, which never rains in Southern California. Yeah. So it feels good, man. It's nice and warm. Almost toasty.
Spring is upon us. Now,
spring is upon us, baby.
Before we talk about your career, Larry, what were you listening to on the radio when you were growing up? I know the first time I met you was in Benton Harbor. Did you grow up in Benton Harbor?
Grew up just outside of Kalamazoo, Mattawan, Michigan, right off I-94, that whole area. Listened to the radio. You know, the big station in Kalamazoo was the top 40 station, 103.3 KFR. WRKR was the rock station. And that's what I grew up listening to. Making, you know, I'd make tapes from the radio. You know, I'd like record stuff from the radio and make cassette tapes of it and then play it back and all that.
That's awesome. I didn't even know if you know this about me, but I worked at RKR for a cup of coffee.
You did?
Corey got me that job. Yeah, fun little story out before we get into yours. I was working at RKR doing weekends because I was still working at SJM in Benton Harbor. And so I would, on the weekends, I'd go to RKR and do like a weekend shift. Well, one time I played a song by Eamon, and it was the unedited version, and he dropped the F-bomb. I was immediately fired. You gotta go. No. You gotta go. You can't play the F-bomb on the radio.
I was honest, but nobody in Kalamazoo cares. They probably applauded you.
They did. The phone line lids up and said, I don't care about the FAA. Play that fucking song again. I was like,
that's right.
So anyway. So let's just talk about your experience before we get into your career in Hollywood, Larry. Let's talk about, you know, how did you come to work with John Jay and talk a little bit about what you were doing? Because if I'm not mistaken, I don't know if you were a co-host, but they called you a stunt guy or a stunt. What was the term that they used for you?
Yeah.
And what did you do?
So many terms. You know John Jay, so many terms he gave me in titles. Well, you know, it really started at the adult contemporary station up in South Haven. Cozy 98.3 was the station back in that day. Which is hilarious that they take this I was still in high school when I got hired out there. Paul Landecker, the program director, hired me. And it was to do like just the weather. That was my first on-air thing, was like just say the weather when you get online. And then he gave me like the Sunday morning show up there. And it was It was so bizarre because you're talking about a 17-year-old Madawan High School graduate, this black kid, going to South Haven to do like Seals and Crofts and Lionel Richie on a Sunday morning with the soccer moms.
Summer breeze makes me feel fine.
Totally. And I started falling in love with that genre because of that. I was like, why am I here? So I did that for like a year or so. And then, because it's the same company, John Jay down in Benton Harbor came across me somehow, and he's like, you want to call in and do like a Bill Cosby voice for this bit that we're doing at the rock station? I was like, yeah. He loved it. And then pretty soon he just said, well, why don't you come in a couple days a week and be our stunt guy? And he called me Larry Hormone was the name. That was my character's name on the show because I was, this like, at that point, a little young college kid running around trying to talk to girls and failing miserably at it. And he's like, this is going to be perfect. So I'd go in, and whatever the topic of the day was at the morning show, whatever came across John's eye news-wise, he'd have me take the screaming yellow Hummer. You remember that?
Yep.
I'd get on this Rock 107 screaming yellow Hummer, and I'd go out in the community, either as a character or as myself, and ask people these stupid questions about the river rising. The St. Joe River, it's going to rise too much. What do you think about that? And it was just insanity.
Yeah.
Pure insanity 3-4 days a week.
And so let's talk, because most of the show is going to be talking about your career in Hollywood, no question, because that's where you took off. But this is Radio Day, so I want to delve into the radio aspect of that. For someone who might not work in the business, one of my listeners, talk about what an average day would be like. Now, when you would come in, did you have an idea? Did you guys talk about it the day before, what you were going to cover? How was the day-to-day, and what made you guys decide what you were going to write and what kind of parodies and what kind of content you guys were going to create?
Most of it was the morning of, so I'd leave, I was living in Kalamazoo at the time, so I'd leave Kalamazoo at like 4 in the morning, drive down to Benton Harbor, and before we went on the air, John and whoever the co-host was and I would sit and talk about, okay, let's have Larry go out and do that. I remember the St. Joe River, the levels were low. This is a perfect example. The levels were low. He said, why don't you go out and ask people, tell them that they're going to tug an iceberg from Alberta, Canada, all the way up the St. Joe River and then melt it in the river. And you got to say it with absolute certainty like you're a news reporter and, this is fact. And, and then walk around downtown St. Joe and ask these old retired people if they think it's a good idea. And so that's what I would do, or a character or whatever. So we would start early in the morning, get the plan. I'd go out in the Hummer. I had a character that you could not do today called Riri.
Riri.
I don't know if you remember this.
I remember Riri.
You remember Riri. We had this football helmet, okay, and Riri, all I can say is that he was a very emotional guy, right? And he would go, and I would, we didn't want them to know that it was a radio stunt. So when Riri went out and talked to people in public, I would just take my crappy college car, and I would jam a cell phone inside the helmet so we could broadcast it live. And I'd go up to like the counter at a gas station, and then Riri always had an emotional fit right before he went to make the purchase or whatever. And he would just be like, "Ugh!" And all they would hear is just Riri screaming and wailing in the background and having a hard time dealing in public. And that was the bit. John and Rick and Phil or whoever were just laughing in the background. Bit's over. Morning show is done. Yeah.
Now, was there ever a situation where you were like, you know what, I know this would be funny, but I'm not comfortable doing that? Because I got to tell you, when I remember you, I remember you had a reputation around the entire building as you'll do whatever the fuck. I mean, you didn't give a shit. You would do whatever.
I didn't care. Because you know what? The biggest thing is I trusted John Jay. He is his comedic timing and his story structure and everything. Whatever idea that he had, I was like, hey, let's go, Chief. I'm down. There was one time where we had a segment called Larry's Lab. Okay. So whenever the morning show came across some weird scientific fact of the week, he had a little theme song for me, and we would put it to test. We have Larry go out and test, can the human body really handle a gallon of milk within 1 hour without getting sick, or whatever the case is.
That's so brilliant.
Terrible. So it's I never really said no to anything because John Jay He didn't have to work hard to convince me. I just trusted him.
Right.
I trusted him. We did everything, man. We did everything on that show.
That was, I think that was my second full-time job in broadcasting. And I got to tell you, John Jay and who was his sidekick, Phil, right?
His brother. Yeah, brother Phil was there, and then before him it was Rick. John Jay and Rick, John Jay and Phil, yeah.
And who was the PD at that time?
Probably Shelley Morgan.
Yeah, Shelley Morgan, yes.
Yeah.
Very strong PD.
John Vance was one, yeah.
But I want to ask you this. What did you learn in that process to like, oh my God, like, because I'm sure there was a little bit of a learning curve.
So it's, again, this is a guy that was like interested in acting and entertainment, but had no sense of direction at all. And so because we planned most of it that morning of, it was a basic bullet point that I get from John. And he'd say, you're like a guy, you're a blues player. He showed me how to play like a quick blues riff on the guitar. And you're outside the McDonald's drive-thru, and every time they try to order, you're going to sing it in the blues. Da-na-na-na-na. I need a number one. Da-na-na-na-na. Hold the mayo. Da-na-na. And so it was character.
Yeah.
It was all character-driven, because every time I went out, I was a slightly different guy, an old blues kind of homeless guy, emotional guy in a helmet or whatever the case is. And I didn't have time to think about it. Just went out and did it. And spontaneity, and it was all improv, obviously, because you're playing off of people who were just trying to like go to work in the morning or whatever. Right. And that was it. It was like an SNL skit just happening on the fly.
I don't know if you knew this, but you guys had an immediate impact on the entire building, because I was doing before you left, I was doing the morning show with Wild Bill on the country station.
Yeah.
And I remember, and had it not been for you and all the shenanigans that you and John pulled, I don't think Bill would have sent me out. But he sent me out on Black Friday when it was still crazy. I think he sent me to like a local supermarket or department store. It was a department store. I don't know if it was Walmart, because this is 2003, 2004. And
Sure.
And he said, okay, now what I want you to do is go buy the jewelry and just yell at the top of your lungs, everything in this cabinet is mine, stay the fuck away. And I'm like, I'm a news guy just starting on this country station, and you're like, what? And I don't think any of that would have happened if it wasn't for Larry Herron on IRX.
Because it gave you the license to step outside of your normal role.
Plus, they saw how successful you guys were with the bits you were doing. I mean, I'm not saying this because I've said this before. That morning show with you in it, because it did take a little bit of a hit after you left, obviously. But that morning show, you guys could have been major market if you took your show on the road. I believe that.
Oh, we wanted to. Yeah. There's a part of us that wanted to for sure, because it is chemistry too, right? It's just the chemistry you had with Wild Bill is the same that I had with John and Phil and Rick and everybody else, where it's like, I trust you. Things may go awry when we get out there. Like, it's got to go nuts. And you just keep rolling until it's commercial time, And it's just, every time we went out, like, we thought we knew what would happen, and it would be completely different. And that's the point, And I think that's what listeners like about the radio stunt guy morning show thing, is that, like, who the hell knows what's going to happen? And they're listening. They're on the edge of their seats waiting to see what the hell is this Larry guy going to do now?
So this is the question I guess I've always wanted to ask you, and I've never asked you this, but what makes you say, you know what? I'm doing this now. What gave you the sand, the courage, whatever, to say, you know what? I'm going to go to Hollywood and make this, talk about your moving to California to pursue your dream of acting, because that's a big step from a kid from some Southwest Michigan.
Huge, man. When I first started at the radio station, there's a part of me that was like, I can see myself being here for the rest of my life. I'll just be working at radio, and when I stop doing stunt guy, I'll go do just afternoon drive or whatever. Gail Olson, who ran the radio station when we were there, he pulled me aside one day, and usually Gail was the guy that, like, had to write a check to Myers because I trashed one of their shopping carts with the Hummer or whatever. So when Gail pulls me in, I'm like, oh shit, did I go too far on something? And he said, he recognized the talent that was there, and he said, we would love to have you here for as long as you want to be here, but I actually hope that you don't stay here for too long. You need to go off and do something else. And he kind of pushed education, because at that time, I was just at the station. I hadn't gone to college yet. So what happened was, towards the end of my stay at the morning show, I enrolled at Western Michigan University's theater department and started really looking at acting, in a serious way for a 4-year degree. For the first year, I tried to do both. I'd get up at 4 a.m, do the morning show, then come back to classes up in Kalamazoo, and I was like, I can't. It's too much. So I had to step away and basically tell John and Phil, hey man, I gotta go. And everybody understood. So I went to Western, focused on acting for 4 years, did a ton of plays, main stage plays and all that, Shakespeare, and it was insane. And then when I got done, I was crazy enough to go to grad school. So then I went to UC San Diego and studied nothing but acting for 3 straight years down there. Did a bunch of professional theater down in San Diego, and then moved up to LA, and that's where I got an agent, got a manager, and started auditioning and booking, and here we are now. So it was
talk a little bit about
step by step.
Talk a little bit about those few. Well, first off, before we talk about the auditions into question, I want to ask you: was that a culture shock living in Southern California?
Oh my God! I just yes, it was. San Diego, first of all, just the weather by itself. I was like, it's January, and I'm playing basketball outside. Like, what the fuck? This is insane. But the program that I was in was pretty rigorous. So it was 3 years. You're in a building, acting, doing Chekhov scene. I mean, it was so focused compared to the morning show where it was like show up in the morning and let's get crazy for a minute. And then now you're studying, you're learning these lines, character development, and psychoanalysis and all that. So it was a perfect complement to the broad comedy improv from the morning show. And then what we got into in a formal acting environment. So San Diego was great. It's a very rich, La Jolla is where the campus was. If anybody knows La Jolla, California, it's like paradise full of millionaires,
Yeah.
So it was culture shock, but I made it up, came to LA, and then that was another culture shock. And here we are now.
Oh, LA.
The whole thing.
Let's talk a little bit about your first couple of auditions. Obviously, you studied acting, and you had an agent, so you kind of had a little prep. But do you remember your first audition, and what was it for?
I remember I was still living in San Diego, hadn't moved up to LA yet. And as soon as I got an agent, they started submitting me for auditions. And that means I had to drive 2 hours up once or twice a week to audition for whatever show. And the biggest shock, I think the first audition was for Cold Case, CBS.
Ooh, yes, great show.
Remember that show? And those casting directors took a liking to me. For when you audition up here, you got to audition a few times for the same casting people before you end up booking it. You just got to get them familiar with you and what you do. So I did 3 or 4 auditions for various episodes on that show. And then on the 3rd or 4th one, I finally booked it. And that was a big one because it was a guest star, which means you're in the entire episode, a lot of lines, character arc, your character goes through something. And it was and that was a shock because you're going from John Jay morning show, drinking milk, to studying acting on stage, very serious, academic, whatever. And then you get up there and you're on set. And being on set is a whole planet of language and understanding how long it takes to shoot one scene. That's this one scene is 30 seconds, but it took an hour and a half to shoot it, and they got to flip the camera around. You do the scene 8 million times. So all of that was kind of a learning process just to get used to what it actually is like to act on a camera for TV or film. You gotta, there's an energy you have to sustain to do the same scene, say the same lines as if it's the first time,
right?
For 2 hours straight while they're getting the shot right.
His character's kind of a goof, but the movie True Romance, I think of Michael Rappaport's character when he's trying to get that role. Is that kind of what it's like?
Yes, it is. It is. It's and then when you get, I remember one of the first things I booked ever in LA was episode of ER. I got on the last season of ER.
I think that's the first one listed on your IMDb rather.
Yeah. John Stamos was leading the show during that time, and when I auditioned for it, it was the role of a guy dressed in this is perfect it took me back to the morning show. The role was a guy who was dressed as a giant Thanksgiving turkey who got his ass beat outside of a store on Thanksgiving.
I remember that show.
Yes.
I'm going to have to go back and look at that.
That episode,
That's you.
Yeah. So, and he's on the gurney or whatever, getting looked at, and he's got an exchange with John Stamos or whatever. And it was so surreal because in my mind, I'm like, this could have been me on the morning show, absolutely getting beat up on accident because John sent me to the wrong place.
Right.
So it was perfect. It was a perfect, like, very first on-camera presence. Just insanity.
The first thing I remember seeing you on, and I was so excited for you because I'm a huge Tim Roth fan from Reservoir Dogs. I think that was the great. But yeah, you were on Lie to Me, and that was a substantial role. Talk about that.
Yeah. Lie to Me, yeah. Tim Roth, and I was a drug dealer, sort of, but he was like a scientific guy. I remember it was a guy who was like a chemist, a la Breaking Bad, who was secretly kind of selling drugs on the side in this facility that he worked at, and then he finally gets caught by the genius Tim Roth, and that's terrific. Tim was great. It was great to be a drug dealer with like a sweater vest. I remember that. It was like a drug dealer with a sweaty on.
It's funny. I recently saw a Facebook meme that in the 80s and 90s movies, you could always tell the douchebag because he always had a sweater tied around his neck. Those were always the douchebags. So Lie to Me. So what was it like working? I mean, because Tim Roth, big time movie star on his TV show, and that's real quick. Before we get to that, I wanted to ask you because this is a different time. Now it's no big deal, but I'm kind of backtracking here because I want to think about your thought process when you started doing auditions.
Yeah.
Were you thinking movies or television, or you didn't care?
Didn't care.
Okay.
Anything. Just to start, you just got to get in front of the camera and get your bearings, get some tape. Get something that looks really good so you can show future producers, hey, this is me on this show and blah, blah, blah. Movies, for me personally, is the penultimate.
Sure.
But either or.
Now, did you get any advice from either Tim or any of the other people, whether it be, as far as like early on, were you asking for advice or were you just kind of like trying to make it like, okay, I belong here? What was your demeanor? How did you treat that?
For me personally, I would say probably most people have this. The first few times you're on set for a TV show, you got to imagine like you're parking at Warner Brothers Studios, okay? You get this pass and you go to this big sound stage and it's just like, that's just Blazing Saddles.
Right.
Blazing Saddles just came out of here. You see Ellen DeGeneres walk by doing her show while you're going to do your show. So the first few times on camera for anything, I think most people are just thinking, make sure you know your damn lines and make sure you don't fuck up, right? Know your lines, don't fuck up, and just do it. Once you get a little bit more comfortable on set, which obviously is where I'm at now, it depends because the leads, like the Tim Roths and all the people who are heading the show, they are so swamped with work and lines and makeup that a lot of times you actually don't talk to them until you're like 8 seconds away from shooting, right? You got stand-ins, so they have people that look like you who stand there while they set up the lights and everything.
Wow.
And then right when it's time for you to shoot, they call Tim Roth in, they call Larry Herron in. Okay, guys, all right, so Larry, you're going to stand here and Tim, you're going to do that and blah, blah, blah. Okay, 30 seconds, we're going to start shooting. And that's your chance maybe to say something to Tim Roth. So you really don't get to know them that well unless maybe you do a couple of more scenes with them and then it opens up. So it's so like slow and fast at the same time.
And I kind of pulled up your IMDb here because I want to go through a couple of these opportunities you had. But talk to me about on NCIS, another one of my favorite actors, Mark Harmon. You played Master Gunnery Sergeant Jason Kelly. What a cool name!
Yeah.
What was that like?
Made me feel good. You know what? It was awesome. I did not get to work with the lead on that one. He was not. I didn't have any scenes with him, but I was defusing a bomb. Which was awesome. I got to see my first big explosion on camera, like my character does not defuse the bomb, spoiler alert. And, but the number 2 guy, and I forget his name now, I spent all day with him, the doofy guy, the doofus clown kind of guy in NCIS.
I know who you're talking about. I can't think of his name either, yeah.
Can't think of his name, but he's
not as big a star as Larry Herron, so I can't be bothered with that.
Yeah, who knows what that guy's name is. No, I do remember a conversation. This is how it goes sometimes with these big number 1, number 2 leads on shows. He's number 2 lead on the show. He's making probably $1 million an episode or whatever. And in full disclosure, we're sitting in our trailers next to each other, and he's talking to me about, he's like, yeah, man, it just sucks. Like, as soon as we stop shooting, and then in the summer, they call me back. I got to do photo shoots, and, I don't have time to go audition. He's complaining a lot about
Michael Weatherly, right? Is this Michael Weatherly?
Yes.
Okay.
Michael Weatherly. He's complaining a lot about the amount of time that show takes from him outside of shooting, the promotional stuff. And I understand that he's probably got a valid point to some degree, but I'm like, dude, you're a series regular on this show with a stellar career. I'm a guest star. I got one episode and then I'm off the show. You cannot bitch to me about all the photo shoots that you have to do in the summers and yada, yada, yada. You got to be a little more appreciative of the fact that you have a steady job for a couple seasons.
I think it was.
And I remember.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I remember thinking that I was like, if I ever get to like a series regular with a big show, big name like that, I will never bitch to other day players about having to do photo shoots, because it's just, what's the point, man? You can't bitch to us about it.
I mentioned to you before we came on the air that the podcast that I'm following, Inside of You with Michael Rosenbaum, I think that's his name. He was Lex Luthor on Smallville, and he was talking to Kiefer Sutherland, and in the episode, Kiefer Sutherland was just raving about day actors and how little credit they get and how much credit they deserve for someone, especially someone coming on as a show. Or he said, they're just, you think of movie stars, but the people like you and other actors are really what keeps Hollywood together.
Well, the day actors, the guest stars, the recurring guest stars, people who are not regulars, really are kind of the engine that drives each episode. If we're talking TV, right? The regulars can only do so much, and you got to have the 1 or 2 episode bad guy that comes in and fucks up their shit. You got to have the good guy that comes in and saves the day. That's not one of the leads. And it is tricky when, you get on set, you don't know the lingo, you don't know anybody, and the relationships aren't there. I just met you for the first time, and we're going to start shooting in 30 seconds. So, and don't get me wrong. I mean, most of the leads I've worked with are really great. They give good advice, and they're just cool people. But every now and then you get those people who lose touch a little bit, and they forget that, this guy just showed up at Warner Brothers, and God knows we need them, so let's just don't be a dick.
Yeah, I'm sure they forget we get to pretend and make lots of money. Let's not forget that. We're not digging ditches, right? You
ain't digging ditches. I love that.
Another role that I'm sure was a pretty cool thing was you played Police Officer Ollie on Shameless in 2012. What was that like?
Oh, yeah. Love that show. First time working with a baby, with a real baby, an infant on set. Joan Cusack. One of the best people I've ever worked with on camera is Joan Cusack, for 2 reasons. One, when we took a break to go get lunch, and I'm like looking for Crafty to figure out where the lunch is, and she was like, Larry, sit down. I know where it's at. Tell me what you want. I'll go grab it. And she made my plate, got me something to drink, brought it over, sat down. Her and I talked for a good half hour, and the scene, she was holding this baby in the scene, and obviously, you don't know what the infant's going to do. Right. It may not be what the script says. And she just rolled with it, man. She just rolled with it, and we all kind of made up what the scene was going to be based off of what the baby did. And Joan Cusack was the leader of that. And she was terrific.
That must have been surreal. I mean, she was in 16 Candles for crying out loud.
I know. I'm just like, it's Joan. It's hard. When you get to set, you first see that, that they're going to be there, right? And you first see them. And she just said, oh, how you doing? I'm Joan. I'm like, hey, how you doing? I'm Larry. And there's always a tiny little pause where I'm like, hi, Joan. That's Joan Cusack. Okay, I'm over it. Let's go.
Yeah,
let's go.
No, I love her in what was that movie she would do with her brother, Grosse Point Blank, where she's taking the gasoline and just and she's burning down the office. I love Joan Cusack. She's fantastic.
And as a Michigander, I love that movie too.
Yes, yeah, based in Grosse Point.
Right.
Another big name show. It was actually before. I don't know. It was actually before. That TV show, but you were on Criminal Minds. That's another great big name show.
Criminal Minds was great. I was a instructor, FBI instructor, I think, something like that. The main guy in Criminal Minds, the older dude with the dark hair.
Mandy Patinkin? No, that's not him.
No, not him. The Oh, God, it'll come to me in just a second. But he's one of the main dudes on that show. He, when we got done shooting, he owns a pizza restaurant in Burbank. And he was like, it was an Italian restaurant in Burbank. And he tells everybody that comes on.
Joe Mantegna, right?
Yes, Joe Mantegna.
Godfather 3, yep.
Yes, that's right. And he was like, I had this pizza shop. You should come down and blah, blah, blah. And like, I remember I went down a couple of weeks later and he was there. Like, we talked even longer. And he like bought me lunch. He was terrific. He was another one of those number one top of the guy on the shows who was just terrific. Like, that's the way they should be.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. That's
Great.
awesome. These big names. But to this point, now we're in 2010, 2012. Obviously now you're not going to have that. But do you remember the first time you were super starstruck and how did you compose yourself? Because it's intimidating when you're working with celebrities. It's one thing to see somebody, but now you're reading lines and you're doing your job with these people. I mean, did you ever have a situation like that?
Oh yeah, it happens in fits and starts sometimes. And I really think that most actors should probably admit if it's someone they really respect and admire, it'll be like that for the rest of our lives. You'll still get a little starry-eyed if it's someone that you just really respect their work. I don't know if it happened in 2010, but I did an independent feature film shot in Michigan, actually, starring myself, but co-starring the recently late and great Tom Sizemore. And Tom Sizemore, the first time I saw him on set, it was a scene with me outside of the car, and he rolls down the window, and there he is. And I hadn't seen one piece of him until they said action. They roll down the window, and Tom has the first line. Thank God he had the first line. So the camera was on him anyways. But he rolls down the window, and he just starts delivering his lines right to me, and I'm just like, oh, my God, Saving Private Ryan, like, and everything else he's done. I was starstruck because of all, he's had a lot of personal issues in his life, but sweet Jesus, that guy's a good actor. And you could see at the moment he started talking, I was like, fuck, I am in it with this guy already. It's that good.
I'm being honest. I have a question specifically about Tom Sizemore later, so I guess I'll jump into this because there's a couple things I want to ask you about. He's from my hometown. He grew up in Detroit and Utica. He had separate parents, and one lived in Detroit, one lived in Utica. But I did want to ask you about that because, well, before we get that, we were talking about what a great actor he is. One of my favorite Tom Sizemore scenes, he doesn't say a word. It's in Heat. Sure. It's in Heat, and they're in the booth at the restaurant, and De Niro just smacks that guy, and there's a guy behind him, and Sizemore just goes, leans over like, what the fuck are you looking at? Mind your business. And he didn't say a word, and I'm like, that's Tom Sizemore. Tom Sizemore might be one of the most underrated actors of all time. So, to that point, what was it like working with him? Because it looks like you guys got to be a little friendly, no?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's just about every scene that he had in the movie was with me. Right, I can't think of anything I've done where I worked with just one character.
Just so my listeners know, what picture are you talking about, Larry?
Sure, the movie's called Made Vicious. Sadly, it's still in post-production, but I do think it'll see the light of day at some point in the next year or so. Hopefully, fingers crossed. It's a funding issue. They're just finishing up and everything. But Tom, the part of me wants to say a bull in a china shop. The other part of me wants to say that you have to watch him because you don't know what the fuck that guy is going to do in the scene. He rewrites it as he goes along. Wow. Almost every scene. And there was one in particular. We were in Grand Rapids shooting outside of GR. And a very high climactic scene where there's a little girl that he kidnapped who's my daughter, and he's holding her hostage until I pay him and yada, yada, yada. Tom didn't like the way any of the scene was written. So he storms out in the middle of the shoot. He just stops, goes out, and he sits on the front porch, and he smokes a cigarette. And I come up to him, and I'm like, what are you doing? Like, we got to, come on. And he's like, I don't like the way it's written, blah, blah, blah. And I should say this and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, well, just do it. He's like, but it's not, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, just whatever you do, I'm right there with you. Like, we will figure it out. Like, we know where the scene kind of needs to go. Wow. Just do the shit, and let's do it. And he and I went back in there, and I'm like on the edge of my seat wondering if, I didn't know if he was going to try to kill the kid or try to kill. I didn't know what he was going to do. And it turned out to be one of the best scenes in the movie as far as tension, suspense, because no one, including me or him, knew what the hell he was going to do in that. He made up words. I made up words. It was great. It was great.
Have you? You can mention Tom if you want, but has there been an actor or actors that made you a better actor? And could you explain that?
Ooh, yeah. I mean, I got to go back to Tom on that, and of recent memory, simply because when someone now on a scripted TV show, you can't just make up shit all. You can't make up lines, and a lot of times they got someone checking every single word you say. You got to say exactly what they wrote.
I hear Quentin Tarantino is very much like that.
Tarantino is very specific with stuff like that. I auditioned for him. I'll tell you about that in a little bit.
I'm excited.
For Django. It's insane. But the thing is if you have liberty to massage the lines a little bit and really make it your own, what someone like Tom Sizemore does is he forces you to do the biggest thing an actor has to do, which is listen and pay attention, not like wait for them to finish saying their shit so you can say your shit.
Right.
But it's like, I don't know where I'm going. I am laser focused on what you're doing. You got to listen and respond. And that's the two ingredients you need to act well is listen and respond. And he forces you to listen to him.
Wow. That's pretty crisp. All right. Well, let's just go into it. No way. I got to tell you, there's two reasons I love Tarantino. First off, most people don't understand the reason Tarantino's successful is because of Sally Mickey. You know Sally Mickey, yeah?
Yeah.
She's my hero, and it's too bad that she's no longer with us. And you brought up Django. If I'm not mistaken, that might have been the first movie without her. But what I love about Tarantino is name another director who writes, produces, and directs his stuff. Spielberg doesn't. Scorsese doesn't.
And
none of them
acts
do.
In it.
Yes.
And appears in it. And
no one else does that in the history. Talk about your
complete
experience.
ownership.
Yeah,
complete ownership. I mean, his heart and soul's in every script, from Kill Bill to Django to Jackie Brown, you name it. So long story short, it's 2000, whatever it was. Let's say 10, 11, whatever. I do this audition, a self-tape. When they started, instead of us going to Warner Brothers to audition, they said, just record yourself doing this scene. And they don't give you much in context. They give you just a little bit. This situation, you're a slave, and here are the lines, and you're talking to this guy, and yada yada. I send it in. A few days later, they say you got a call back, so you got to go into the office. Normally, when you get a call back, it's just you go to the casting director and you do the scene. They work on it a little bit, and then you wait to see if you booked it. Well, with this callback, they were like, you're going to right off Cahuenga Boulevard in L.A. The callback is at Quentin Tarantino's office. You're going to read with Quentin Tarantino. I was like, what? Holy shit. I just couldn't believe it. So I get in there, and we essentially, he takes 20 minutes. I've never had this happen before. He sits me down opposite him at the table, and he takes 20 minutes and illustrates why he wrote the movie, what the movie means to him, what the soundscape may be like. I mean, it's almost like he was pitching like I'm a studio, and he's pitching the movie to me to produce it. But he really wanted me to have more information so I could give him a good read. So, we sit down and we read the scene. He's playing the character that he played in the movie, which is an Australian, like slave wrangler. And I'm playing like one of the slaves in the cart who's responding to Jamie Foxx and him and yada yada. And we do it a few times. And we shook hands when we got done. He told me he liked my read. He thought I was great for it, yada, yada. And now we get to the hard part of L.A., which is you come out of an audition for Quentin Tarantino at his height, for a major motion picture starring Jamie Foxx, right?
Right.
And everybody else in that movie. And then you don't hear anything else. For whatever reason, you didn't book it.
Crushing.
You just didn't book it.
Crushing.
And then you go see the movie a year and a half later, and you're like, fuck, no.
So was it the scene where they killed his character? Is that the scene you're talking about? Because from what I understand, he wasn't even supposed to play that role. I think somebody else was.
Oh, really? Now,
I don't know.
When we read for it, he was reading for that role. He had his like Aussie accent down and everything.
It's a bad Aussie accent, but it's Tarantino, whatever.
Yeah.
I recently saw a meme on Facebook that says, just remember that Quentin Tarantino wrote a scene where Salma Hayek puts his foot in this character's mouth and he cast himself. I'm like, yeah, I never thought about it like that. That's kind of weird, man. But no, Tarantino.
Yeah.
But I mentioned Sally Mickey earlier. For people who don't know, Sally Mickey was his editor. So from What Reservoir Dogs all the way through. I think Django Unchained was either his last movie with her or her first movie without her. She was the editor. And after Reservoir Dogs, I've heard Tarantino say that he would film to her edit. And so they were very. He's called her his only true collaborator, which I think is high praise.
Guys like that know Tarantino. Guys like that, when they're shooting, even for TV, it's the same. When you're shooting a big, whatever, the director's constantly thinking about setting it up for the post shoot.
Right.
When they got to cut it all together, how's it going to match? What kind of shot over this shoulder? Blah blah blah. To make it easier for those guys too, to tell the story. Because you got to remember, the editor is just as much of a storyteller as an actor or director. I mean, the way they cut it, the way they show your reaction instead of mine when you say that important shit changes the story, So you got to have somebody who knows what they're doing.
A couple years ago, my wife got me a box set of Tarantino's films, and one of the extras was outtakes. And there was so many outtakes where when somebody would flub a line, they would, so they knew it wasn't usable, they would look in the camera and say, "Hi, Sally." Like there's pictures of Kurt Russell just like bloodied up. "Oh, hey, Sally." And I was
Sally.
like, you know what? If I'm an editor, that's just great. That's just great. So, Tarantino, have you ever auditioned for? He's obviously the biggest director you've auditioned for, right?
In person,
yeah.
I auditioned for tons of others. Most of it right now, and the landscape in LA is just all self-tape coming out of COVID. So you just send it in. If you book it, they'll let you know, and then you meet them when you get to set or something like that. But for then, that was the biggest. At that point, that was the biggest for sure.
Larry's been in Modern Family. I'm going to scroll through some of these, and I'll ask you about it.
Yeah.
Modern Family, Sex Genie, Sunset Overdrive, The Brink, Fountain of Youth. Fountain of Youth, who was in that picture?
Fountain of Youth was a pilot, a TV pilot that a friend of mine wrote and produced. She shopped it around, never went anywhere, but I was playing
It looks fun.
This character. It was. I was playing a somewhat closeted gay cop who has a female friend who just constantly gets into trouble with the law. So he's trying to keep her from staying out of jail while keeping his job as a cop at the same time.
That's
It's
awesome.
Great. I love that. I love that show.
You've been in, like I said, Criminal Minds, L.A., Law and Order, L.A., Shameless, Modern Family. Modern Family, huge. Law and Order. I mean, Law and Order is the who's who. I mean, that's a great show.
Law and Order L.A. The only reason why I mention it as you scroll through it is because, so we all know the original Law and Order, but then when they did a Law and Order L.A. some years ago that lasted maybe 2 seasons or something, and then it got canceled. I play a lot of cops on TV, if you haven't known. I'm playing a cop with the 2 leads. I forget their names, but the 2 guys that are leads.
You played Sergeant Daniel Bart. That's your character.
Daniel Bart. Talking to the 2 main leads on the show, right? And we're in the middle of shooting this scene, and then the assistant director comes up. And I noticed that both of those guys were acting all weird and distant, and I was like, maybe they're just assholes. I don't know. The assistant director comes up and whispers into my ear, and she goes, "Larry, I'm so sorry. They just found out that the show's being canceled. And this is one of the last episodes, so if everything seems weird, then that's why." So I just remember, I was like, that never happened to me before, that in the middle of shooting, the cast got notice that, hey, we're after this or next episode, we're done. Now go ahead and finish shooting and give it your all, sport.
Yeah, no, Skeet Ulrich, Terrence Howard, Corey Stahl was in that. Rachel Tick, I think I named the woman that was in the movie with Arnold. I can't remember her. I don't know how to say it. Tickotin. Rachel Tick. She was in, you know what movie I'm talking about, right? That's Sharon Stone.
So.
Total Recall.
Total Recall.
Yeah, she was in Total Recall. But yeah, well, that's a shame. You're doing a guest spot and they're about to cancel the show. That's terrible.
I was like, well, I guess my character's not coming back. All right.
That's hilarious. It's not hilarious. They didn't probably like that. So also you've been in a episode called a show called The Brink, Spider-Man.
Jack Black.
Jack, talk about that. The Brink, right, with Jack Black.
The Brink, yeah. Tim Robbins, Jack Black. That one only lasted maybe 2 seasons. I was on 1 episode. I played a helicopter pilot, and it was the coolest thing is, watching this helicopter in the middle of downtown LA. They closed off all the streets and it lands between these 2 buildings. And I was like, holy shit, that pilot's good. If he fucks up, man, we're making national news here.
That was an HBO show, if I'm not mistaken.
HBO. Yeah, that was on HBO. Good premise, but for whatever reason, it It had like 2 seasons, and that was it. But it was really cool to meet Jack Black because A, he is hilarious, and B, now that my kids are 6 and 4, and we just went and saw Super Mario Brothers, and so they're like, who's Jack Black? That guy is so funny. And I'm like, I know him, man. I've worked with that dude.
School of Rock, no matter where it is in the picture, it's a remote dropper for me. I love that movie.
Yeah.
Robot Chicken. I've always been, this is an interesting, talk about this. This is cool. Robot Chicken.
Yes, Robot Chicken. Matthew Seinrich, a friend of mine, him, with Seth Green, they've been doing this show since like 2006 or something like that.
Yeah.
And it's balls to the wall, Adult Swim. It reminds me of the morning show. It's that kind of, kind of raunchy comedy, batshit crazy. So every now and then they bring me on to do various voices. That's obviously on the voiceover side of what I do. Yeah.
And I brought that up specifically because that wasn't, you've done a couple jobs where you're using your voice, and obviously you're using your training from your radio, but talk about how you approach something different if you know you're just going to be doing a voice for a cartoon or something of the like, as opposed to, you coming in and it's your people, you're seeing you deliver your lines. How's that different?
The best way I describe it is when you only have your voice to tell the story, you got to be real specific so that we understand, so we totally get the character. Even if it's like a crazy, Robot Chicken kind of thing.
Right.
You still got to read through it. You still got to know in your mind what this character looks like and like where he might place his voice and the way he moves and stand up when you do it, so that when it all gets animated and put together, it's still a 3-dimensional character, whether it's comedy or drama or whatever. But the good part is that you don't have to like memorize all those lines, you don't have to do hair and makeup. You don't have to do all the other stuff that just takes forever and is kind of a drag. You just show up and get in front of the mic and say it a million different ways.
Now, Robot Chicken, that's a little bit blue, yeah? That something that you're not going to let your kids listen to, right?
Yeah, not yet. When they get older.
But have you showed them something where it's just your voice coming out of a cartoon? What is that like?
They see more. I actually have a couple things coming up. I know I can't mention any titles, but I got a couple of things coming up on HBO Max and something on Disney Plus. I'm really excited about that they will be able to see. So when it does drop, they're totally in their wheelhouse.
That's cool.
They do hear commercials when I do a lot of TV commercials and everything.
That's Dad's voice.
Right. Every time it comes on, we'll just be eating dinner or whatever, and Rock will be like, "Dad, is that you?" I'm like, "Yes, yep, that's me. That's me.
Awesome.
That's me." Yeah,
that's
cool.
Awesome. All right, I have to ask you about NCIS LA. That's LL Cool J.
Yeah.
You played, guess what? A cop, DEA agent David Ramirez.
Go figure. So I just did this one, a little over a year ago. First time, I've had characters, obviously, that didn't come back, right? That's just a one-off.
Right.
I've had characters that did a whole bunch of stuff, but this is the first time that my character died on camera, which is awesome. Spoiler alert for anybody who's a year and a half off that show.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so in the cold open of the show, I'm a DEA agent in a suit, and we're running away from the bad guys, and I tell the good guy, "You go, take this info, and you go. I'll hold them off." And then we hear some gunfire, and the next thing you know, from a 20-story building, my body just down on the ground, and they shoot me and throw me over the building. It was so cool watching that happen.
I don't think you can come back to that show.
Can't come back. Can't come back to that. But watching like how they do it and everything, it was awesome. I was like, at least I went out fighting, man. At least I went down fighting.
Now, you said there's some titles coming up that you can't mention, but I don't know. I don't think I'm speaking out of school because these are listed as upcoming on your IMDb. The Flower Tapes and Made Vicious. The Flower Tapes are in production. You play a character called Eamon, I believe, and this is about an investigation of the video files documenting an online support group's eerie encounters over the course of several days. As the shocking case is unraveled, the unthinkable is revealed. This sounds riveting. Talk to me about this project.
Psycho thriller filmed at the height of COVID, right? When nobody could be in person to shoot for the most part. Some independent filmmakers got together and said, we want to shoot this thing basically like a Zoom thing. So that's why the whole story is based on
that's cool.
Me as this group leader walking people through their, problems in life, and then some freaky, mysterious shit happens in the back, and it's shot Zoom style so we could shoot a whole movie. Everybody's in their own living room, and there it is. Yeah, we just did some post-production about 2 months ago in that, so hopefully it comes out soon.
The other one, real quick, I want to give you a little bit because in the description, on IMDb, this is very cool. Jim, in parentheses, Larry Herron, is a widower trying to raise his daughter while keeping the peace in a small town while dealing with his debt to Victor, Tom Sizemore. This is the one you were talking about.
That's the Tom Sizemore film. 5 years ago, I think we shot it now, and it's still like almost there. I think they're doing some touch-ups on CGI and everything. And both of these are the kind of films that end up, either shopped around at film festivals or Netflix or Paramount Plus. If somebody says, I will just buy this film, I'll give you $3 million for it, and then we're going to put it on our platform.
Yeah, I will say this. In the top cast, you're first before Sizemore. You're before Brian Thompson. And for people who don't know Brian Thompson, he was the villain. He plays a lot of villains, but he was the villain in Cobra. Back Cobra, the last movie I ever saw at the drive-in theater was Cobra.
Oh, he was great,
You're the disease. I'm the cure. Yeah.
I'm the cure. He was terrific.
He's in a couple of great movies. Like I said, he's not a name that you'd reconize, but you see his face and you're like, oh, I know that guy.
Oh, I've seen him. His X-Files, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
He was just great. We had met him up in Grand Rapids. Same as Tom Sizemore. Like, for whatever reason, we didn't actually talk until they said, and action. And then we do the scene, and he's got this voice. I always thought I had a voice, but this dude, his voice was just so freaky, and it freaked my character out. And I was like, oh. And then when they said cut, like, we shook hands. We talked about Michigan. He's a cool cat. I went to his house. I forgot about that. I went to his house and had lunch like a month after we finished shooting. He lives out in Pasadena. He's great.
Now, have you? We talked about some things that didn't happen. Have you been to any Hollywood parties?
This is the year that I got engaged to my amazing, amazing wife. I was engaged at the time, and I got an invite. Me and a buddy of mine got an invite to go to the Halloween party at the Playboy Mansion.
Shut the front door. That's amazing.
Shut the front door. Very, one of those very exclusive. I don't know how I got invited because it's not like, oh, Larry Herron, like we know your name. They didn't know who I was.
In my head, I'm thinking Beverly Hills Cop 3. Or two rather. Two.
Two, yeah. I felt that way the whole time, man. Now, so that party, that was the biggest Hollywood party I'd been to, was at Hugh Hefner's house before he passed away.
Wow.
I remember seeing, the grotto and all that. I remember seeing the weirdest part was, and this made the news, Kelsey Grammer was there, and he's hanging out in one of his little bungalows. And I walked by, and I was like, hey, how you doing? I'm Larry. He's like, hey. And I noticed he's got like a baby in his arms. Like a baby. Like a
real baby.
9-month-old. He's just holding a baby. And I was like, is that a baby? Is that a baby? At the, trying not to judge him, but I just needed to know, what's going on. He was like, yeah, I just couldn't find a babysitter. So, we're just hanging out and yada, yada. And it was just the most bizarre thing. And I remember the next day, TMZ or somebody was like, Kelsey Grammer under scrutiny because, he brings an infant to the Playboy Mansion, and it's probably not a good thing. All was fine. The baby was fine. Nobody got hurt or anything. But I was just like,
which one doesn't belong? Crazy. It's the baby. The baby should not be here.
And the screaming peacocks. That was the other thing.
Screaming peacocks. You need to say more things about that.
Yeah, Hugh Hefner had a mini zoo on that property over there in Beverly Hills. And he's got a whole fleet of peacocks that just run around the property. And if you ever been around a peacock long enough, they scream this high-pitched whatever. So everybody's partying, dressed up in costume, and there's a lot of skin everywhere. And out of nowhere, you'd be like, so how you doing? And you just hear this. I was like, either someone's being murdered or his peacock is just doing its thing.
My favorite show, and I'm so sad it's coming to an end. I am a huge fan of HBO's Barry. You're going to make an appearance. Am I wrong about that?
Barry as a cop. I know. You're surprised. As a cop.
I love that show.
That's so good. Bill Hader is one of those comedians. I think about Robin Williams. We think about this guy where you say, oh, okay, he's a comedian. He's really funny. But if you cut him loose and let him do his own project, like a TV show, you realize that he's got really good storytelling ability. That, yes, the situation is funny, but he's great with drama, great with tension, great scene writer. So I just got a random audition, which I do 2-3 auditions a week. And it was a bizarre one because they just gave me this monologue, like 4 or 5 sentences. And they were like, they just need you to do this monologue 3 different ways. No context, no, like, where are we, what's going, nothing. Just say these things, do it 3 different ways. So I just did it 3 different ways. And then when I showed up to set, Bill was directing, he directs the episodes. And he ran up to me, shook my hand. He was like, I loved your audition, man. Those 3 different reads were hilarious. That's why you're here. And then we started shooting. It was great.
You just said something that made me, because this is something that I mentioned, the inside of you with the podcast. He often asks his actors what kind of feedback they get from directors and stuff. Do you get feedback from directors? Oh, that sucked. Do it again, or do they ever say good job? I mean, is it very callous, or it depends on the director? I'm sure, but do you get that?
Totally, yeah. It depends on the director. I think most of them, and the really good ones, obviously do this. The dialogue is them letting you know, like, okay, well, this is as far as you can go over here. It's going to be a tight shot and all that kind of stuff. But as far as performance goes, the good ones, the first couple of takes, when it's your coverage, meaning when the camera's pointed toward you, the first couple of takes, they really just let you do what you do, right? Just do a couple takes. Just get it out, let you do what you do. And then if they see anything that I might be missing, and then they'll be like, that was great, man. Can you just come down at the end of that last one? Because I think she's really listening, or whatever the note is. And that's it. But mostly, directors, with the exception of a Tarantino and some other guys, they're kind of good at directing an entire production. They're directing light, sound, background, and all this other stuff. So they're hoping, and this is why they had me do 3 different reads. They're hoping that just get a guy that can just do it really well, many different ways, and we'll pick the best one in post-production, and it's set. So really, you got to be your own director in a way, because they're not going to give you a whole lot of notes, The good ones just let you do it a bunch of ways, and then they'll cut it up real beautifully after that.
I also want to ask you a question about behind the scenes, Larry. Like I hear a lot of stories about, like, obviously your sitcoms are run for multiple cameras, but when you're shooting a movie and some of these, because some of these TV shows are very movie-like. But do you shoot with? Is it shot with one camera or multiple cameras, and what dictates that?
The production, the director, it's moving away from, even the ones that are very cinematic, are moving away from just one camera, because then you got to flip the camera to different angles, and it takes forever to shoot this half-a-page scene.
Right.
So time is money, and the cost of it all. So a lot of times they will have a couple of different cameras, and if the space is big enough, they can get 2 over-the-shoulder shots at the same time, meaning they can get all of Ron's coverage and Larry's coverage in one take, as opposed to, all right, cut, stop, stand-ins, come in, flip it around, and then get your coverage. So it can cut the time down by like half if they set it up right.
Besides Barry, what other, and obviously the the Tom Sizemore picture. Talk about, your top bill, the Larry Herron picture. Talk to me about, is there anything else we should be looking for you in the future? What's coming up?
One of the things you mentioned when you went on IMDb is you mentioned like Spider-Man, which is a video game, and most of us probably, 45 and under understand that like the video game world is just as lucrative and big as the feature film industry, right? As far as scope and production. Sure. So I do a lot of video games, and there's been a couple like Spider-Man that came out, Sunset Overdrive, a couple years ago. I was one of the main characters on that. But there's one in particular this summer that I cannot say anything about. I know it sucks. But, oh, God, the kid in me just can't wait for it to come out, man.
Kid in me
cannot wait.
In a world where Larry Herron can't speak about his video game. I can do voiceovers, man. I'm just telling you.
Oh, that's good. That's good. No, yeah, there's the video games are, you put it this way. This thing that's coming out this summer, I auditioned for it 3 years ago, booked it shortly after I auditioned for it. And they said, they were like, you got to sign a note saying that you're going to live in L.A. for the next 10 to 12 years because all the updates and your character, you come back and record a bunch more stuff and everything. And I've been recording ever since then. I mean, it's now almost 4 years in the making. And for one video game that has yet to be released. Most feature films don't take 4 years to make, but that's how big it is, and that's how excited everybody is to do it. So I can't wait for this one.
I'm going to put you on the spot before we sign off. You've obviously got a huge career behind you. You've got a huge career ahead of you to this point. And I think I know the answer to this, but what has been your favorite experience on a set and why?
So many. Yeah, there's two that stand out. I gotta split it between two. One is obviously Made Vicious, the movie, A, because it was shot in my home state, B, because you're working with Tom Sizemore. We lost him too soon. I was one of the last people that got to work with him. And C, because I got to play the lead, which is taxing. And there's a lot of, stunt work and everything, and it was amazing to be the guy in the whole story. A well-rounded character in the whole story. And then the other, to swing in the opposite direction, is I did a recurring number of roles in Adam Ruins Everything.
Oh, yeah.
Anybody remembers that show, right?
The most obnoxious white guy I've ever seen in my life.
Absolutely. And they would bring me in to do like these. One character was like, I'd play like this black German investigator. And they're like, we need a German accent for this. And it reminded me of the morning show, right? I showed up. I didn't even know until I got there that he needed me to say all this shit with a German accent. And I was like, this is what John Jay would have me do in Benton Harbor. No problem. So I did it so well that he just kept bringing me back in to do all these crazy characters. It's the morning show. Awesome. It was morning show all over again.
That's so cool. Well, I know I can speak for Bill and Corey. We are just so tickled that you're out there doing your kicking ass and chasing your dream, because how many people do that? And you, Larry Herron, did it, and you're doing it because, you might not be a household name, but there's a lot to be said to make a living you've been doing it for almost 20 years now, making a living as an actor in Hollywood. That, to me, much love and respect for you, my friend.
Dude, the bottom line is, and I really appreciate you having me on, man. It's the notion of this podcast, obviously, is kind of who I am. It's very simply put, it's the old saying of like, you do what you love, never have to work a day in your life.
Yes, sir.
If I never become a household name, I don't care. I like the fact that I'm basically the same guy that did the morning show in Benton Harbor all those years ago, just showing up and doing random characters, and I make a pretty decent damn living off of it.
Not too shabby.
I ain't digging ditches. That's
so, right.
Thank you, John Jay Morning Show, and all those people for putting up with me back then.
Larry, I want to thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story, my man. Appreciate it, brother.
Thank you. Ron, it's good to see you, brother.
You too. Thank you again to Larry Herron, and thank you for checking out Radio Dayz the Podcast. Today's show was brought to you by Team 71 Mortgage Group. Are you looking to buy or refinance your home and have questions that need answers now? Call Brian Allure, 810-444-6466. Today's show is produced by Ron Robinson Studios. If you need professional marketing videos, professional photography, headshots, maybe you need drone content from a licensed drone pilot, that's me. Head over to ronrobinsonstudios.com. You can also hear previous episodes of Radio Dayz the Podcast there as well. And if you want to learn more about my upcoming documentary about the history of radio, Radio Dayz 101 Years of Radio, very soon to having that ready for public consumption. Click on Radio Dayz the Movie under the Documentaries tab at ronrobinsonstudios.com. Thanks for checking out the show. Hope you enjoyed it. Until next time.
You can't go. All the plants are going to die.